on to some announcements and discussions. Please note that this meeting is being recorded for assistance in developing minutes and things like that. So, as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of September 16th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure as transparent and open meeting as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website and on CMAP's website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So, with that, moving on, I think staff wanted to provide some virtual meeting logistical announcements before we take a roll.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just do a real brief rundown of some logistic announcements. As you heard, this meeting is being recorded. Please use the mute function when not speaking. This will help eliminate excess background noise. Use the mute button for those on the computer, and those on the phone can press *6. That will unmute or mute you. Members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box. Staff will be monitoring that. If you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, please indicate your desire to do so in the chat box. For members of the committee, when you're making a motion, please include your name so we can properly record it. And that's it for my meeting announcements. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say, if you didn't say it, is if you're gonna make a comment or something, please try to turn your video on. So thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. Can we go ahead and call roll then?
Yep. I will get that started. All right. For roll call, starting with CDOT.
Present, Jason Burnett.
CTA.
Present, Christina Bader.
CMAP.
I'm assuming is that.
Yep. Council Mayors.
Yes, Creed.
Metro.
Yes, Tim Trilling.
Pace.
Present, Dave Tomsick.
RTA.
Present, Robert Morris on behalf of Heather Mullins.
IDOT. Present.
Present.
FHWA.
Here.
And FTA.
Present.
All right, I believe that's everyone.
You missed the counties.
Sorry, the counties.
Sorry, Sid Kenyon here on behalf of the counties. Thank
Sorry.
you.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Sid. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Welcome. Nice to see y'all. Hopefully, folks have had a chance to take a look at the agenda packet. And I guess first question is, does anybody have any requested changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. So also included with the package is minutes from January 10th, 2022. Hopefully folks have had a chance to look those over. Does anybody have any discussion items or changes to the minutes that they'd like to raise? Hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to go ahead and approve those minutes?
Motion for approval.
And a second?
Second.
And who seconded that?
Jason Burnett.
Okay, so Sydney motion, Jason second. Are there any questions on the motion? Hearing none, staff, will you go ahead and call roll?
Sure. CDOT. Was that a yes?
Yes.
Sorry. CTA,
Yes.
CMAP,
Yes.
councils and mayors,
Yep.
Metra,
Yes.
PACE,
Yes.
RTA,
Yes.
and the counties.
Yes.
And I'm not remembering if you vote or not, but unless there's a tie, I think we're good.
It wasn't a tie, so no need. Well, thank you very much for looking those over. Next thing on the agenda is, included in the packet is a listing of UWP committee membership for FY23, and let me scroll down here. Does anybody have any comments or questions on committee membership?
Yeah, this is Sid here. The only comment I have is my phone number is incorrect. I don't expect that would necessarily preclude us from approval, but who can I reach out to have that changed?
You can reach out to me directly, Sydney, and I'll just update it on the version that I post to the website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sydney. Is there any other questions or comments on that?
Did we want to take a minute just to, I know there's some alternates on today. I think our TA, I know Sydney, you're alternating, and then I know Alex is sort of stepping in for CMAP, just to give a brief introduction and welcome to you guys. If you want to maybe just go around and introduce yourself.
Sure. I can go first. I'm Sid Kenyon, Senior Transportation Planner with DuPage County DOT, filling in for Scott Hennings today. Been with the county for 6 years, and appreciate you guys bringing me on to the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Sid.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Morris with the RTA. I'm a senior analyst. I work mostly in our local planning efforts, and I'm filling in for Heather Mullins today. I've been with the RTA about a year now, so thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, welcome, and thank you. Is there anybody else, and apologize if there's a big list here, so I'm not really focusing on the list so much. Is there anybody else that's sitting in as an alternate or would like to introduce themselves?
Alex, did you want to say hi? I know you might be filling in now with UWP. I don't know if I'm sure people are familiar with you, but I don't know if you wanted to make an introduction.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Ensign. I'm the Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation at CMAP. I've been here about 6 months, so this is my first UWP committee meeting. Thanks for giving me a moment to introduce myself.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for strategically aligning us.
And I'm not an alternate, but I'm a new member to the committee since the last time you met officially. So I've taken, so David Kralik from Metra, taking over the member position for representing us in planning and programming and about 20 years.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you, David. And Daniel, I just want to call to your attention, Dave Tomzik put a phone number revision in the chat pod.
Okay. Thank you.
You know, I ought to mention, so the IDOT membership with me as chair and Holly as alternate, you know, unfortunately, the longtime chair of this committee, Tom Kelso, passed away about actually a month ago today. And so, you know, I've been kind of functioning in that role for a little while. Doug DeLilly is now our primary contact with CMAP. There is a vacancy that we will be filling that will pretty much permanently place our primary liaison with CMAP. And once that position is filled, we will we'll be changing up our membership to maybe assign that person this role so that they can, get in the habit of seeing everybody and getting to know everybody and getting worked in with UWP and other processes. And then I would probably move to alternate, but no changes necessary at this point in time from our perspective, but that will be something that will be happening hopefully within the next 6 months. So we've got a couple comments, a couple revisions to the committee membership in terms of phone numbers. I don't know that that really stops us from moving forward with an approval action. So I guess I'd like to move forward and request a motion in a second.
I'll make a motion, Sid Kenyon.
David
In
Kralik,
a second? All right. Any questions or discussion on the motion?
That was David Kralik, the second.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Hey, Mike, I
And-
was just going to ask, is there any effort to recruit somebody from IEPA, or is that even an interest at this point anymore? Obviously, they'd be coming from kind of the air quality perspective, but it's been a long time since we've had IEPA participation. So just didn't know if there's any updates on the expectation there.
That's a good question, and I think we should put it on our to-do list. And so I don't know that, I haven't taken any action, but I can say that through the EV programs and things like that, our communication with IEPA is picking up a little bit over here, and that's outside of the whole conformity issue. So I guess I do think it's value added to try to get somebody from IEPA to attend, or at least find appropriate committees to attend outside of conformity in terms of CMAP meeting participation.
Hi, this is Jason with CDOT. I think that's a really good idea. I know through some of our projects, we've actually reached out to IEPA to learn more about air quality monitoring, focusing on the externalities of freight impacts on communities. And so through that work, it'd be great to have more connections and communication between the agencies.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's probably been about 10 years since we had a regular EPA counterpart between that agency and CMAP and NPO activities. And I think that gentleman kind of covered a lot of committees and did a lot of things, but it was it was a very helpful voice in certain matters. And I think the subject matter we're getting into and getting more into these days, I think there would be some value to trying to get some expertise across the committees. Again, they probably can't contribute too many staff people, but if we could just get one person that kind of in the know on what's going on around here, that would be helpful.
So we're going to hear a little bit in a moment about CMAP's review of their committee structure. And I guess what I would recommend is we let CMAP get through that process, and then maybe you and IDOT and CMAP have a conversation about when and where IEPA is most value added based on the function of the different committees or advisory groups. Whether or not it's this one, I just kind of saw it and kind of noticed it. And so I think we want them. I would want, if I were in CMAP's position, want EPA and maybe some of the other agencies like that involved. So let's put that on our list, I guess. I don't know if that would go under notes for this particular topic or in other business. Does anybody have an opinion on that? Well, I guess, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with that. I'm not sure if UWP is maybe the most appropriate committee, but it'd be good to plug them in somewhere, and then for us to be aware, so that if we do have needs for coordination or information, we kind of know where to turn to.
I would agree. I guess short of a formal motion to make some kind of change here, I would recommend we put it under other business, and I would request a motion to approve this list and get a second, or get another motion to make a formal change here.
I'll motion again to approve the list as is.
I'll
Your
second
value
it.
add, I like you, Sid. Thank you. And Mike Einhorn seconded that. So any questions on the motion? Staff, can you call roll then, please?
Yep. CDOT,
Yes.
CTA,
Yes.
CMAP,
Yes.
councils, mayors,
Yes.
Metra,
Yes.
PACE,
Yes.
RTA,
Yes.
and the counties.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so next item on the agenda, that motion passed, and thank you for everybody that. The next item on the agenda is kind of our big ticket item, the FY24 UWP call for core proposals memo, which is included in the meeting packet. And as mentioned in the memo, and most committee members might be aware, an advisory group was put together, made up of folks from the Transportation Committee. This was done, well, the review process was done at the request of the Policy Committee. And what the ask on this advisory group was to take a look at project selection, subcommittees, working groups, et cetera. Take a look at the committee structure of CMAP and provide advice on that. So Alex Ensign is going to give a little bit of background on that, and then we'll move on to questions. So Alex.
Thank you. Yes. So one of my tasks in my brand new role at CMAP was to facilitate the meetings of this advisory group at the direction of the MPO Policy Committee, as the chair mentioned. And the group has met 3 times over the course of August and September. They might meet a 4th time just to confirm some of their recommendations, but we're currently compiling their recommendations in a memo to be given to the Transportation Committee at their November meeting, and then presented to the MPO Policy Committee at their January meeting for review and approval. These recommendations would go into effect in FY 2024, so they wouldn't go into effect until next year. So it won't affect this year's process, but there might be some changes recommended, mostly around subcommittee and working group structure, mostly to just make sure that we're very strategically using our partners' time. As you know, we engage with a lot of agency partners through our various committees and subcommittees and working groups. We want to make sure we're using that time effectively to everyone's advantage, especially with the significant influx of funding that we're potentially able to receive through IIJA. So those recommendations will be forthcoming in this memo. They will likely include just some broad recommendations around standardizing bylaws for various committees and subcommittees, having a clearer reporting structure between committees, subcommittees, and working groups, just to make sure that we're really coordinating everything, creating a new working group for IIJA project coordination, I think maybe a few other items, but mostly the recommendations around standardization, better coordination, And also kind of reviewing the membership structure of each of these subcommittees and working groups to make sure that we have the right folks at the table. As pointed out, even with the IEPA member of this committee being absent. I know that there's IEPA representation on the CMAC and TAP project selection subcommittee, so perhaps we can review some of those recommendations through this process. Are there any questions about the advisory group or any of these recommendations?
Alex, I may have missed this in your explanation, so I apologize if I did, but who is making up that advisory group again?
So the advisory group is comprised of members of the Transportation Committee. And I think it might have been included in an email to the UWP committee members over the summer. So if you'd like, I could make sure that I or someone else from our staff forwards it to you. It included Jessica Hector-Sue, Kevin Carrier, Jeff Shriver, Alice Gallagher, Rocco Zucchero, and Mike Vanderhoof. So these recommendations would really correspond to the subcommittees of the Transportation Committee, the working groups that are oriented to our transportation work.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
I'll add, I mean, there was a few different sort of structure proposals, status quo, keep it the way we're sitting right now, sort of a hybrid with the slight adjustments. And then there was another structure that kind of split. I think it was tip out from Transportation Committee. And, you know, we just talked through, the pros and cons of each. And at the end of the day, a lot of it, to me, comes down to how CMAP with their partners, you know, based on the context, regulatory and jurisdiction wise and things like that, you know, how do they think that the structure should be set up to best keep consensus building and moving things forward in a good direction. And with that, you know, we might revisit or clarify and have some discussion verifying like our purpose, for example, as a UWP committee, and you know, how we want to interact and things like that. So anyway, it looks like a healthy endeavor, and interested to hear what comes out of it from CMAP and the TC.
Yeah, we should be able to provide some updates after the Transportation Committee meeting in November.
So is there any other questions on that? Well, hearing none, I think we need to move on to discussing the core program and the proposed schedule. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry Dixon, CMAP's principal overseeing the tip, to talk about the proposal and the schedule.
I think I offered for Terry to sort of step in here just because I was so closely working with the schedules, so that's okay.
No problem. I apologized. I must have missed that.
Oh no,
anyway,
it might have been not related. So, but I was just going to step in. So based on what we were just discussing and what Alex has been working on, for the initial planning purposes for FY24, we're looking at starting with the mark that we had in 23, which was 28.5 million, of which about 22.8 was federal and about 5.7 in required match. It's expected that we won't get the final mark numbers until possibly the end of October from IDOT. So if there's any change that comes about from that, we'll include that in the program. Just looking at the schedule in terms of when we would be releasing the call for core proposals, be on October 17th, which is this Monday. We would then be looking to have that, given that we wouldn't be having a competitive program, it should be shorten that sort of timeline to November 7th for when they're due back to CMAP. I'll be taking a look and compiling all those into spreadsheets, getting all the core proposals in order. I'll be sending out templates as part of that call for core proposals that you will fill in and get back to me. And then we'll be briefly meeting on November 16th to discuss our core proposals. For those of you who have been on the committee, you know that that's a relatively it's not that long. It's usually a brief 5 to 10 minute sort of overview while talking about your sort of core program for the year. We'll then meet on December 5th, pulling all the proposals together and bringing sort of a recommendation on, sorry, they're due back to me on December 5th, and then we'll be having the meeting on December 14th to provide the adoption of the FY24 program. We would then be moving that on to the coordinating committee in January, as well as the transportation committee for approval, the CMAP board in February of 2023, and the MPO policy committee in March of 2023, with a final UWP document for IDOT on April 1st, 2023. So that's sort of the overview of the schedule coming up. Any questions?
One question from me, Dan. I apologize if I may have missed this because I'm new, but why is it that we are not doing competitive programming in FY24?
So I might turn that over to Alex, just in terms of, I think because of what we were doing with the realigning of the committees, it was, we want to wait till we see what happens there until we make that decision for having a competitive program.
Yes, that's correct. We're continuing to hold the competitive program, but part of the recommendation that will come out of the advisory group will actually be solidifying and hopefully just really standardizing the competitive program for several years out. We're hoping to provide a lot more clarity around the competitive programs through these recommendations that will be approved by the policy committee. So we will not be doing a competitive program this year, but the anticipation is that we will be doing a consistent competitive program over at least, I think, the next 3 years.
Daniel, can you just give a brief explanation of the word core, and when you're asking for core program proposals, what precisely you're referring to? Sure.
That's basically every year when folks have applied, they usually limit it to what are sort of core transportation planning programs for their agencies. It usually relates back to what we're tasked with from a federal standpoint. The competitive was always projects that were sort of in the wing that we would vote with a scoring sheet and bring back. And occasionally some projects would come in year after year. And one year they'd get funding, another they wouldn't. But core programs should relate basically to your core functions in transportation planning.
Is there any other questions or discussion? Well, I looked in the. Oh, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I had a question about the funding from last year that was set aside for complete streets planning. I believe it was about $800,000. And that was part of fiscal year 23. Could you just say a little bit about what the plans are for that?
I can't personally say. I'm not in charge of that part of the program. I know right now it's been a little bit on hold. So we're sort of figuring out what the complete streets program is going to look like.
Is that money that needs to be spent this fiscal year?
So hold on a minute, I'll hop in here, Dan. So there's a couple things going on in this fiscal year. One of the elements is there was already work in Safe and Complete Streets going on in CMAP. So part of what we're trying to do is bring it into a core, into a program that is identified and can meet the federal standards and requirements that are newly put together. And then separately, but kicked off are some positions to basically stand up this program. Not dissimilar from the ADA, if you're familiar with work that CMAP's been doing to start to foster ADA compliance with local communities across the region, we will be doing a similar process around Safe and Complete Streets. Part of that will be, we believe, probably, and again, we have to wait for the recommendations coming from the transportation and policy area, but related to how we do competitive programs here at CMAP and define what that looks like, expecting that some of those will be in the areas of Safe and Complete Streets and or in the areas of ADA, just using 2 examples. Again, we have to get through those conversations, but at this point, those are the steps that are in place now.
So CMAP is just folding it in, anticipates just folding that funding into things that are existing or planned for this year.
For this year, there were projects that already met the definition of safe and complete streets, and then we're developing a program for how that works with our partners, such as yourselves, to stand up for the coming years.
Is there a way that we can see what projects that funding went to?
We can pull some information on it, sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you. And to the earlier point of funding marks for planning purposes, if I remember correctly, yeah, the 28,567,244 is FY23 amount for CMAP, combined federal and state. We haven't delivered this year FY24 marks yet, but we're looking at a 2% increase on the federal side. And I believe I saw some finalized FTA numbers for 23 the other day, and they were a little bit higher than what we estimated. And so the plus 2%, you know, might be sort of a minimum. There might be a little bit more of that, but the number I saw was a statewide number. And so it would be, it might have some impact on the marks, but it would be a slight positive impact, I would say. So generally speaking, my expectation is we're going to go plus 2% on the federal side, and that should help out a little bit. And yeah, so FYI on that. Are there any other questions or discussion?
Mike, this is Dave. I have one question. I know in 23, CMAP significantly increased the budget on their end. Now, it's under core, so that money would have to be spent in 1 year. So I guess if there was some questioning as to, like, with the complete streets, that money should be spent within FY23. Is that correct?
So the total mark for CMAP was 28,567,244, and I'm going off memory here, but I believe we took 400,000 out of that for competitive program. So the remainder, which is around 28,167, would have been for their 3C operating agreement for FY23. The way we have those set up right now is to minimize the need to carry over funds. We've got a 12-month UWP, but the agreement actually is live for 18 months. And so if there are activities that are still underway, not quite finished up, there is the opportunity to capture those activities in the next year in the FY24 UWP and continue to spend money. Another good example would be you did some consultant work during 23, but you didn't get invoiced until a few months after the end of the fiscal year. So some of that, so in a manner of speaking, yes, that's a 1-year amount, but through agreement with all the MPOs, we're providing a little bit of extra time to complete invoicing for activities that are still being finished up. So anyway, the answer is kind of yes and no to your question, and I hope that helps.
Is that similar to the same agreements that the other recipients received? Because I thought it was only
MPO.
because it was only a year. So I guess there seems to be, if there was 18 months versus the other ones are 12 months, I was just questioning, is that something that we should discuss with the other recipients?
You're talking other MPO recipients?
No, the other the other project sponsors, such as
Talking about
the counties or the service boards.
Are you talking about entities that would apply for core funding, for example?
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how CMAP is setting up those agreements. Is that a separate agreement, or are they being run through the same agreement or a single agreement that we have with CMAP?
All agreements are based on the agreement we get from IDOT, and then we set up 12-month contracts starting July 1st through June 30th of the following fiscal year for the operating agreements.
And those are between CMAP and core program recipients,
Yep.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, but then the CMAP agreement with IDOT is 18 months.
So I would, if we want to talk more about this, I would have to probably, yeah. So the reason we went to the 18-month agreement is to eliminate carryover year to year that was causing us to build up a metropolitan planning fund balance of unused funds. I think a tool for that I would recommend for CMAP might be to keep their contracts pretty tight so that spending is known and completed within that 12-month operating year. And then as a whole, CMAP could invoice us for that additional 6 months. But that, that's kind of a situation between, I think, you all and CMAP, but I can tell you that IDOT would prefer that CMAP have controls in place to get all their spending done during the 12-month period. That extra 6 months is sort of it's a period of time to kind of finish up invoicing and any remaining activities that allow continuing to use that single year state fiscal year amount, but at the end of the 18, we need it to be kind of done. So that requires some sort of fiscal constraint. I don't want to use that term, but it requires some systems be in place for CMAP so that they can get things cleaned up and finished up for the 12-month operating year.
Yeah, I just brought it up because in the past, it's been an issue with getting the contract on July 1. And I know this year there was attempt to get it before that, but it still came in after the fact. And that puts pressure on the agency to get all the billing in, really by mid-June is really when things have to start settling down. So, I mean, there's a commitment to get those contracts out and signed and be ready to go in July. That would help with, keeping to that 1 year timeline. So again, as we're talking about this, that's been one of the challenges, is to have the contract ready to go for July 1st.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on that? And just asking CMAP, is that something that would be a change to this core program announcement and schedule, or would that be an item that would be discussed sort of offline since it's been raised?
I think the process is in place. Their fiscal constraints that we have to maintain our audit standards and close a fiscal year responsibilities. So I can't really comment on that. But I know that we have those timelines in place, and they took multiple years since I've been working on UWP to get in place. They used to previously not be there, and it was causing a lot of problems in terms of payments of bills, sometimes coming in 2 years after the project was done. So that's why we have that in place. But that's all I can sort of comment on that. I know Angela knew more, but she's no longer here.
Yeah, I mean, the 1 year, it's just making sure that the agreements are signed and in place for July, so you do have that available in the Service Board's accounting board.
I totally understand, but we're also limited by our ability to have agreements in place with IDOT. So it sort of is a step process. They get to as soon as we can, and that's how it works.
I just brought this up because last period, last 23, we said, it was commitment that they'll be ready to go, and both on IDOT and CMAP side. So I just wanted to bring this up again, that we stay on schedule and we try to get them out and ready to go by July.
And I think certainly IDOT has been making steps with the MPO. They, two successive budget cycles moved up the deadline for the budget. And so certainly steps are in place to be able to get those agreements in place. But CMAP is again, partnering with IDOT for our agreement with them. And then once those are executed, we're able to make our agreements with you.
And to add, and this discussion topic and the core call for projects and schedule are pretty critical to that purpose and to that end, to get our agreements in development underway and executed as close to July 1st as possible. We're going to have a pizza party when we do it with all the MPOs. We keep getting pretty close, maybe a little bit closer every time. So any other questions or comments on the core program and schedule? Well, hearing none, can I have a motion and a second for approval?
I'll give Sid a break. Motion to approve.
And a second?
I'll second. Robert with RTA.
Okay.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions on that motion? Hearing none, staff, will you call the roll?
Sure. CDOT,
Yes.
CTA,
Yes.
CMAP,
Yes.
Council of Mayors,
Yes.
Metra,
Yes.
PACE,
Yes.
RTA,
Yes.
and the counties.
Yes.
Okay. That's all we have.
Excellent, thank you. The motion passes. So next on the agenda is our UWP Committee FY23 schedule. Item 4.03 is going to be discussion and approval of the committee schedule. There's a memo in the packet. Hopefully folks have gotten a chance to take a look at that. Does anybody have any questions or items for discussion?
I would just to follow up, most of the schedule follows what we went through in the call for proposals. I would propose that we have another meeting following the approval in May 10th. Sometimes we do it in June, but I'm thinking just given that we have moved everything up, that we have to get to IDOT in the year that we have that then. And I would also just put it out to the committee that historically we've tried to have at least one meeting during the year to have presentations of recently completed projects. So just maybe put that in the back of your minds. If you have something you really want to show off, I'm always looking for volunteers to come forward. We're probably going to have at that session maybe 2 to 3 presentations just of recently completed competitive projects that we would like to just sort of show off to the committee so we can see what we're doing.
No, thank you, Daniel. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because a couple meetings ago, the UWP committee did express an interest and a desire to check in on some of these projects as they're moving along and hear feedback on them. So thank you for the offer to bring some reports. But what I'm hearing from you maybe falls a little bit short of a motion, correct? This is sort of a, be open to the possibility of adding a meeting after this May meeting listed here, correct?
No, I was gonna save it for the May meeting. We usually sort of set the schedule, but then it's sort of not to meet for just like 10 minutes to set the schedule. We open it up for a little bit of time to go through those types of recently completed projects.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Hearing none, can I get a motion and a second for approval of the UWP Committee FY23 schedule?
Sid Kenyon, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Jason Burnett.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, staff, will you call roll?
Sure. CDOT,
Yes.
CTA,
Yes.
CMAP,
Yes.
Council Mayors,
Yes.
Metra,
Yes.
PACE,
Yes.
RTA,
Yes.
and the counties.
Yes.
All right. 8 yeses.
Motion carries. Thank you. So item 5, next on the agenda is other business. Is there any new business? We do have the IEPA item noted earlier. Is there any other new business?
Hey, Mike, this is Lenny Canal with the Council of Mayors. Quick question. For FY23, is it IDOT's intent to subsidize the entirety of the local match for the entire UWP program?
For FY23,
So that's for CMAP, Council of Mayors, all the core proposals.
And Doug, I don't know if you've looked at the agreement lately, but Doug, I do believe we did provide either state matching funds in full or a gap between local and what the required non-federal match was. Do you remember that off the top of your head?
I don't remember it, Mike. I think Tom might have been involved in that portion. I haven't looked at it since.
Yeah, Lenny, I think that so we got 16.
I threw a hard
MPOs.
one at you, Mike.
Well, you know, and I kind of knew it was coming, and I'm pretty sure that, but there's a few different approaches we're taking in the state. I believe for CMAP, what we do is we provide, this last year, we provided state matching funds in the amount of the required non-federal match. And for those entities that were bringing local funds to the table, which we fully support and encourage, we would still make available the state funds. So I would need to go back and pull the agreement to give you a precise answer on this. We have committed to all the MPOs to, because of the large increase in the federal funding amounts, to assist with non-federal matching funds. So some of them we're given the full amount. Some of them we are providing the gap between the local contribution and the required non-federal match and making the remainder available. If I pick one or the other, I'll be wrong. So I'd like to look at the agreement and get back to you if you don't mind.
No, that'd be perfect. And then keep Dan in the loop as well, because if we need to amend agreements on our side, because the PLs have already began to invoice for FY23. So we just want to know, because we've also, you know, we, in most of the situations, we also invoice our individual towns for the local match. And for most of us, the money's already come in. So we just want to, you know, see what we have to do moving forward.
Understood. And so we'll get you that information. And then the issue, and it's going to continue, I think, to be an issue, is, you know, there's a 22% increase in federal funds last year. And so the MPOs that were getting local contributions for non-federal matching funds are all having to go back around to their locals and have conversations about that, and try to see if they can get an increase in the local contribution. Excuse me. And so that's a conversation that's going on right now with regards to annual operating funds, and then also we're taking a look at some actual metropolitan planning fund balances and spending those down. And so the matching fund issue is one that we need to keep bringing up and discussing. So thank you for raising the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Well, and I feel I just got to make the statement too, and as great as it is that the state's stepping up and helping out with the additional federal funds, I'll just remind folks, especially if there's new folks on the call, this region in particular ran into some very real issues with over-reliance on state matching funds for the federal funds for the planning process for a period of a couple of years there. So the federal team, ourselves, Federal Transit, I know Tony's on the call. We've been encouraging every step along the way as we can to not shy away from local dues. The over-reliance on state funds really has caused some problems in this region in the past. So there is the real issue of a lot of extra federal funds coming this way, and locals aren't ready to match all those at the moment. We get that, but please understand there's a flip side to that as well. So, and again, that's taking nothing away from IDOT, trying to give them all the credit in the world for stepping up and helping out this time. But just please understand there's some history involved here as well.
Yeah, to add to that, as part of the advisory committee that looked at the group structure, CMAP staff, and I see Cam is on here, reviewed a bunch of other large MPOs revenue structures from around the country. And what we're doing with state matching funds is pretty unique when taking a step back and looking at things nationally. We're committed to try to help everybody fully use the federal funds that are coming to the state. And so, you know, that's the main reason why we're doing what we're doing, but we also know and can point to examples in our state and other places where having local contributions appears to be a pretty consistent piece with some of the really high performing MPOs, because, you know, local agencies, they get more involved. It's sort of the skin in the game thing, and there's good participation. And so we think it's a healthy thing for the locals to be contributing, and we're also partners in all this, and we'll do what we can to make sure we're able to fully utilize federal funds.
That's why I am opposed to the mentality with cohort 4 paying nothing. Everybody's got to pay something. You're handing a blank check to the engineers, sorry to say.
And yeah, I'm not an expert in what you're talking about, but I can tell you with some of the programs that that IDOT's rolled out recently, we have provided some matching fund support to communities that you know, might otherwise be unable to implement projects, basically. And so I comment is I think understood and well taken, and that'll be something that I think is a little bit outside of UWP, but we've also done things with some statewide programs that we're implementing.
The only reason I said that is because Cam and I have had a discussion on that topic, and I'd like to see it go someplace at some point.
Maybe I can jump in and try and tie the two together, Mike. You know, just a general concern, as John just said, about folks, locals not having skin in the game in projects, whether they're planning projects or implementation projects. You know, while we want to assist all of our high need communities and understand that raising local matches is definitely difficult, and you know, we're certainly being directed from our federal partners to give assistance there, but finding that balance, I think, is you know, what's going to be the right thing for this region on the planning side as well as on the implementation side.
Can't disagree.
Well, thank you. So we're still on item 5, other business. Is there any other questions, comments, other business to bring before the committee?
I had a question kind of back to the prior conversation about the committee potential restructuring. Just trying to figure out how the competitive program changes fit into that. Again, just if you could say a little bit more about that. I mean, so once decisions are made about what's happening, then those people who will now be charged with that will make some decisions about the competitive program. And I only ask because this group spent a fair amount of time over the last year talking about the program and, you know, how to make it more aligned with what IDOT wants to see. And I just, if you could say a little bit more about the future of the program.
Want me to take a stab at that one, Mike?
I was gonna see if you or Alex wanted to respond first.
Sure. I mean, I think the idea is that we need to get direction from our policymakers, and our policymakers are on the MPO policy and transportation group. And so we've been meeting with them, and they're going to give us direction, but we don't have approved direction yet. We have a subcommittee. So we need that direction before we can really develop any further actions, recommendations, changes, suggestions. And so, you know, once that information is approved, then going forward, we'll take their recommendations, their ideas, whatever they approve, and apply it to a competitive program moving forward at CMAP. So that's really what we're waiting for. Anything we would share at this time would be premature because we don't have the feedback from the policymakers as it relates to that. So do we expect to receive it? Yes. Do we expect there to be a competitive program? Yes. Can I tell you what the details are of it? Not until I have an approved recommendation coming out of the MPO policy and transportation groups.
Okay, thank you.
I guess, well, it would be premature, but I'll ask anyway. Do you, I can't remember. I guess I was wondering if I guess what I was thinking, or maybe what I was hearing, is that there would be a high likelihood the competitive program would stay with the UWP committee. But I may be remembering that incorrectly. Is that something that you recall, Amy, or is that something that's up for decision?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can directly relate it back to who it lives with, but I think what they're really grappling with is we have some really big challenges, which you've always all heard of, you know, the safety challenge, the ADA challenge. So do we want to use our competitive programs to make further progress, just using two examples in those two key areas that we've heard from partners, that we've heard from FHWA and from IDOT. And so I think they're contemplating whether those types of more directed funding for the competitive program can help us make greater progress across the region in those two critical areas. I'm not saying there won't be two more critical areas that go with that. There certainly are lots of things that they could select, but those are two examples of things that have been discussed at that level. And again, depending on which example you come up with, I'm sure lots of folks could opine on coming up with criteria for appropriately distributing those funds across the region.
So are you insinuating that that advisory group is looking at multiple competitive funding sources?
I think what they're trying to come up with is a strategy that, because we have new funding from the federal government, it can come down from different, I'm going to call them buckets, right? And so that federal funding is going to come down. We have organized ourselves around different selection groups for different funding groups, but it doesn't have to be that way. Some of them could be different. That was set up by the policy group and the transportation group previously. So they're just looking at all their options. They looked at how do other MPOs do it? Is there any different ways, different considerations we could take into? So I think they're just being open and taking a refresh look at how we're organized and asking, based on the new direction and the new bill, are there any criteria, any voices we're not hearing from, any different organizational styles that we should consider? So it's no bigger or smaller than it was originally. It was just like, we have new funding sources, we have new funding direction. Are there things we should take into consideration based on that new information?
Because the thing is, with 2 years of being on the core, that if you can introduce competitive, that means the core program will have, if funding remains the same or just slightly increased, a lot of those core programs are going to have to be cut back in funding to pay for something for competitive. So I think looking at at how the funding comes into question, because if you have 2 years of programs on the core that are based on that budgeting element, then it's going to be hard to reevaluate and cut back so much to actually have a competitive program. Because that's always been in the past, that the competitive has always been just the, basically the leftovers. And, what we get 1 or 2 projects, 500,000. So, I mean, if you want to have a robust competitive program, you're going to have to fund it too, which means if status quo, a lot of these core programs are going to have to be cut back to fund the competitive. So looking at other funding sources or how to, these programs work out would be beneficial.
And yeah, thank you for that comment. I can tell you, kind of as it was mentioned earlier, the new federal transportation authorization, IDGA, plus state programs that were already put in place have created a lot of new programs. Some of these are formula programs, and the trickier ones are actually discretionary programs. And so, we're really encouraging CMAP to be taking a look at how to respond to those, and a lot of that going on in the background, so to speak, is going to need to factor into what their decisions are about committee structure and where and how to use resources.
One thing, kind of from CDOT's perspective, what we've been looking into and thinking about is, how do we meet our challenges? And a big part of that is people. Like we've, have so much work, and that's kind of the irony with all of the funding that's kind of firing on all cylinders, federal, state, local, that we have a hard time getting projects through procurement and completed. So that's our focus. I know CMAP has started kind of like a planner program where they embed planners in local municipalities. And so, I think maybe I'm kind of interested in learning about the pilot projects around that. And then I'm also interested, so there's, CMAP, RTA conduct planning studies in the city. But what we've struggled with is that once they're done, it's like they're not really integrated within kind of the implementation pipelines. And so it's kind of the planning is done, but then it kind of has nowhere to go. And so maybe we can take a look at existing resources and see how we can better leverage those in addition to thinking about competitive.
That's a great comment. I'm sorry, I'm writing. Thank you, Jason. I don't know if there's any follow-up questions or comments on that, or any other new ones. Well, just in my observations kind of match yours. It's really busy. It's a changing landscape from a funding perspective and maybe a priority perspective, and procurement and getting stuff underway is tough, and implementation, at IDOT is difficult, moving from planning to implementing programs. So your comments resonate, and hopefully we can talk about it some more. So any other questions or comments under other business? And if not, hearing none, oh, I'm sorry, did I get
just
one
one
more?
clarification. So the recommendations for that will be coming to the next transportation committee, or just the group, or is that just kind of report out on that? Or will there be specific recommendations for that reimagining of the competitive program, or refocus of that, or is that that's kind of at the next transportation committee?
Yeah, my understanding is that a recommendation will go up to the Transportation Committee, who will deliberate it and make a recommendation to the Policy Committee. But Amy, would you like to comment as well?
Agree. That's our expectation, that the kind of directional recommendations will be provided, and then something will get approved by both bodies. And then I would expect CMAP would have to draft documents and other things that will further clarify it, that need to come back to the various other committees, bodies, working groups, whatever it may be.
So the last request for any other questions or comments under other business? Well, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. Staff, can you please read any comments received prior to today's meeting, or is there anybody who's asked to speak is there anybody in the public who would like to speak? Please identify yourself in the chat box, or feel free to unmute at this time.
We didn't receive any prior to the meeting.
Okay, well, hearing no public comments, we'll move on. The next meeting will be November 16th, 2022. And so look forward to seeing everybody there. And if there's no other business, we can adjourn. Thank you.
Do we need to make a motion? We're good.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Motion second. Everybody in favor, voice vote, and everybody in favor to adjourn.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you. We're adjourned. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, rest of your week. Good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.
Yep, thanks all. Bye-bye. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep, take it easy.